Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here today. And we are also so excited to have our impressive lineup of panelists joining us as well. Just a few housekeeping items before we jump into it. We are recording today's discussion, so everyone will get the recording afterwards. And feel free to chat in your questions in the Q&A. I will be monitoring the Q&A throughout, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions today as possible. We only have 45 minutes with everyone today, so we do have some questions already teed up here for them. For the panelists, we'll try and get through those, as well as any additional questions that you stick into the Q&A. So feel free to just chat those in. Before diving into the questions, I do want to introduce each of you to our panelists. They have very impressive backgrounds, and we're excited that they were able to join us for today's discussion. We've got Marcia Spiker. She is the Rehabilitation Program Specialist for the West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services. She has been with the state of West Virginia for 25 years, and 20 of those years have been in vocational rehabilitation services. Prior to that, she was a transitional counselor in West Virginia schools. We also have Jessica Garlick joining us today. She's a transition support teacher at Sherwood High School in Montgomery County, Maryland. And Montgomery County is the largest school district in the state of Maryland. This is Jessica's 9th year as a transition support teacher, and she's spent a total of 23 years in special education at the high school level. And then we also have Kelly Dalton. She's a subject matter expert and education solutions advisor for University Startups. And we here at University Startups are so excited to have snagged her for joining our team. Prior to University Startups, Kelly spent over 20 years in special education, and she's held roles as a transition coordinator, a special education teacher, and special education department head. So definitely across our panelists, it's clear we have a really rich mix of experience with us today. So let's dive right in. We'll start by setting the stage. I'll ask a question. This is open to all of our panelists to jump in. What are the biggest barriers that you see students face when it comes to accessing transition services? And how have you worked around them?
I'll go.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Marcia.
Yes. Well, transportation always comes up. We always have transportation issues in our rural areas, and sometimes they call that geographical isolation. So that, and then the lack of early exposure, like the awareness of what vocational rehabilitation services are, and that we are an employment agency. I think that those are two of the biggest barriers.
Yep,
Oh,
that makes sense.
okay, I'll jump in too. I think for me, and I work with such a wide range of students with IEPs here. You know, we have students that are going to four-year colleges, and then we have nonverbal, severely autistic young adults as well. So I think the biggest challenge for me is kind of directing the kids kind of in the middle so they can get their needs met. Obviously, you know, the ones that are going to go to college or, you know, they can definitely can get employment support. And even some of our really lower level students can get the support. But I think it's kind of those middle of the road young adults that kind of fall through the cracks sometimes.
Yep, I've definitely heard that before as well. Marcia, you had mentioned as far as the rehabilitation services, some of the challenges there. I do know there's a lot of educators out there who may not even fully understand the difference between pre-employment transition services, full vocational rehabilitation transition services. Can you break that down? Just give an overview and explanation of the different services that are offered and what those differences are.
Yes, 100%. So the pre-employment transition services are for students aged 14 to 21 with a documented disability. And for our folks, that means an IEP or a 504 plan. And that's really helpful. That's kind of what we need to get the ball rolling when we're looking at providing pre-ETS. There's no full application. This is just exposure to the world of work and advocating for yourself, Now, actual transition services, that's going to be anywhere from assessment, training needs. It could be VOTEC training. It could be a community rehab provider taking students out to do one-on-one training with them. We do job placement, and of course we do job coaching supports and things like that. But we have a vast amount of services under our Pre-ETS. Our employment specialists also do it. So they do work experience, internships. Like, there's just so much that we have to offer.
Yeah, that is great. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it actually looks like when a school refers students to your services? What happens on your end, and what makes a referral go smoothly versus one that doesn't?
Yeah, I think getting the full referral, making sure that we have what we need is very important. So once we get that referral, it's assigned to the transition counselor. We have a counselor that is assigned to every high school in the state of West Virginia. One important thing that I just want to make note of is staff turnover is high. So if you are expecting to get Marcia every time you go to the high school to give her a referral, you're not necessarily going to get Marcia. So making sure you have other contacts like the local office manager, a district manager, myself. I'm pretty flexible and resourceful, and I make sure that referrals get where they need to be. But just making sure you have current documentation, that they understand what VR is about. We're an employment agency. And when I first started here, one of my bosses said, it's not a social service organization. We're here to get them a job. And so that was foreign to me because I appreciate big picture stuff. But I think just making sure that we have all of the information that's current, any assessments, things like that.
All right, that is helpful. And then Jessica, Kelly, from your end, you were referring and are referring students to these services. Can you talk a little bit about how your team coordinates with your local services and what that collaboration actually looks like day to day?
Yeah, so some of the issues are very similar to what Marcia said here. There's a lot of turnover. And through my years as a transition support teacher, I've kind of taken a different approach. The first couple years, I was contacting or trying to contact parents prior to their annual IEP meeting to kind of discuss DOORS supports that are available, trying to get the authorization signed by them so I could refer their child. And that became kind of overload for me, and I think the parents as well. So now what I do is at the beginning of the school year, I send the DOORS information to every single parent of a student with an IEP. And then I have a monthly newsletter, and every month I share the information about DOORS as well. And I ask if they would like me to refer their son or daughter to reach out to me. And the reason I also started doing that was it put a little ownership on the families. I was finding that I was referring children, the parents were giving me permission, but then they were not following up with what they needed to do with the DOORS counselor. And that's not fair to DOORS. And then they were getting dropped from the, wait list or whatever. And I totally understood why, because if they weren't following up or calling back, there was other young adults or adults to service. So I kind of found by putting that ownership on the families to reach out to me, there was a little more buy-in. I also offer to do the eligibility. We just do them over Zoom now. That initial meeting, I often offer to do it during the school day. So I have the students sit with me. The parent can log on from home or wherever they are at work and kind of get the process going.
All right, that is great. Kelly, I see you nodding along. How was your experience similar? How was your experience in your role as a transition coordinator?
Well, from the teacher perspective, though, when I was in a brick and mortar setting, we had a counselor that was assigned to the school. So it was a lot easier. They were actually on site. As a transition coordinator, one of the biggest challenges would have been that it was a new virtual school. There wasn't a lot of, procedures put into place yet and what we were going to do. So it was a lot of trial and error in terms of who we were going to actually invite to the meetings. Was it going to be the local level counselor, or were we going to look at it from a state perspective, because it did serve all the counties. So a lot of it was awareness for the parents at that point, getting them to understand that the service was there and what it was. That was hard. So a lot of emailing, a lot of phone calls, and a lot of strategizing. So it was different for each situation, I guess is what that would look like. It was a process that was being built, I guess.
Yeah, that is something I've heard too, just in terms of getting that parent involvement, can make that difference in terms of successful use of services and not. Would love to hear from all of you, just diving a little bit deeper into that parent involvement. What has worked well for you? How are you getting parents engaged? What's working on your end, both Marcia from your perspective, as well as Jessica and Kelly from your perspective of the school perspective in terms of getting that parent engagement? That's so vital to the success here.
Yeah, I think on our end, it's early involvement. I mean, we may not necessarily do an application or an intake on a freshman. However, get involved. Let's start some pre-ETS services, some work-based learning, advocacy, career exploration stuff early so that they know what VR is about. And then the other thing is myth busters. I'm big on that with Social Security. That seemed to be a barrier a lot for parents, not so much the students. And so we are grateful that we have benefits counseling now. Some of our providers do benefits counseling, and it's just that initial consultation that this person works through Social Security to give, current information about your son or daughter. So that's pretty helpful too, I think, for the parents.
Something that we do in my county through the transition office at central office is we do tips night. So about every month in the evening, we have a virtual Zoom meeting, and it's a different topic each month. So we have a doors night, we have a DDA night, we have a college night, where every parent is just invited to join. And I think it kind of is just exposing them to those supports that are available. Often I find ninth grade parents kind of it's too much. The transition to high school is already overwhelming to them. And then when their child gets closer to either graduating or exiting from our school system, that's when they're like, oh no, I really need some supports. And then I think they're more willing to kind of hear the supports. And I think it just, like Marcia said, is kind of really reaching out to the parents, the ones that obviously have greater needs. I'm definitely more in communication with those parents, or sending them emails, or offering to do just kind of one-on-one Zoom meetings outside of the IEP meetings, just to kind of build that relationship. And also not to overwhelm them. I kind of give them like a yearly checklist, when they're still 7 years from exiting, if they're a diploma-bound student, this is what you need to do this year, or this year you need to do guardianship, or this year you need to do doors, or this year is DDA, to kind of break it down for them, because I think it is just overwhelming for them when they look at the big picture.
All right, that is great. That's really helpful. Thank you. Something else that comes up that we hear a lot about is that just the limitation on services. We know that the agencies, the local agencies can are limited in terms of how many students they can take, in terms of capacity. Sometimes there are more students that are referred than there is space or availability or resources to handle all of it. Marcia, from your perspective, when the agency is at capacity or a student ends up on the wait list, what do you recommend to the schools to do in the meantime? Like, what is available there in terms of helping fill some of those gaps?
Well, the only time we have a wait list is when we have an order of selection in place. We serve people on an order of selection, and it goes from most significant disabilities down. We just had that in place, so I have really good information for you. We've just done that. I would refer anyway, and I would make sure that you continue to contact the rehab agency. we weren't putting people on a wait list unless they were in the other categories, which we put a hold on due to funding. But we have to spend 15% of our budget on pre-ETS. So we really don't have a limit of students. Just it's not too late to refer, even if it's a senior and we're now in March, get that senior in here. The only thing I would say that it would be the time for the counselors doing the applications. They have to be available to meet with the students to take care of that. So I think it's helpful to make sure that the transition counselor at the high schools, ours, they have a list of referrals or IEP meetings that, it's open invitation to those so that you can recognize the face and the parents can continue to make contact.
All right, that's great. That is definitely helpful. Speaking of filling in the gaps, Kelly, going back to something you said earlier, and when you started your previous program, there wasn't a lot in place there. And you and I have talked about this, like the program was largely relying on random surveys for students. Where did you even begin when it came to building out real transition services with those limited resources and kind of helping to build that up from the ground up?
Well, it was from the ground up. As I said, it was a new school. They didn't even have like a school counselor yet. So there were a lot of different variables in play for the situation. Some of the teachers, came from elementary backgrounds. So we literally had to start with the basics. Let's do the initial, what is transition? What's it look like? What are your responsibilities? And then have a discussion about where do we need to start? What do you guys need the most? And I watched a lot of NTAC modules, encouraged the teachers to. We did self-studies with the Transition Coalition, a lot of fun conversations with the State Department transition person, a lot of conversations with DRS in terms of how we could make this work and what it would look like. It was just a lot of collaboration. Ultimately, in my research, discovered university startups, and it checked the boxes, so to speak, for what we needed for a virtual setting. Everything was together. It was kind of the silent trainer for the teachers as well, with the reviewer piece, but it really became the central hub, which is what we needed at that point because there was too much information in too many places. We had a lot of transient students, so we didn't always have that information that we needed. It was very difficult to get parents involved because they were usually hiding from truancy. You know what I mean? Everything had been negative for them and their experience in the school system up to that point. So it was a lot of phone conversations with those parents, a lot of reassurance to get them on board. And then with this university startups, it really allowed the students to get in there. They actually came. They turned on their cameras and they were engaged. That was a huge step right there, was just getting them to show up and be part of it. So that was the initial, okay, this is going to work. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah. So it sounds like you took a number of steps in terms of building out those transition services, really building from the ground up. Jessica, with your school, like you guys are larger, there's definitely more resources in place, but you and I were talking, you've also there are some transition services available within your school to students, including some work-based learning. Can you describe what that is, what that looks like, and how you were able to get that going?
Yeah. So when I took over 9 years ago, we always had work-based learning experiences for our diploma-bound students. We have an in-school coffee cart, or they would go work at the local assisted living home and places like that. But when, the push from the state overall was just kind of, they want every student to leave here prepared for career or college or whatever. And the push with apprenticeships and internships. I kind of really started to think, like, what could I implement here? We have some limitations where our school is because, like, we don't have a public bus stop here. So that kind of limits some of our students who don't drive to have like early release to go to certain job sites. So I am very lucky that first of all, I have full release, so I don't teach at all. I work with all 250 students here that have IEPs, and I attend about half their IEP meetings every year. But I wanted to develop an in-school site here that they could practice job skills. So I was actually moved. We have a greenhouse building. It has a greenhouse, but it also has classroom space. So this year, what I did is I set up basically like mock work areas where students can come out here and practice job skills. So I have like a mock grocery store, mock drugstore, a mock department store, an office space. I have a bunch of job boxes that I made. So whether students can't leave maybe because of behaviors or their schedule or transportation, then they can come out here and practice some of those real life job skills in this environment.
That sounds awesome and just really valuable experience for those students. So Jessica, Kelly, in terms of getting some of these services off the ground in-house, what are some learnings you had, and what would you say are some of the important first steps for others who are looking to get some of this off the ground at their school?
I think start small. I think just my personality is like, I wanted to get everything done right away when I came up with this idea. And I couldn't do that, because of funding. I was asking for certain items. I wasn't getting a response. So I really just started off small and things. I think my first thing I started with was the job boxes. I just did some research online, got on Pinterest, came up with ideas, and made some job boxes. And then it just gradually got larger. I asked for donations from staff in the school, clothes or old food boxes. And people the amount of donations that I got from the school staff was amazing. And I think where I still lack is just kind of getting everybody to buy into it. Some teachers are great about bringing students out here to use this space. Some teachers are not so great about coming out here. But I'm hoping, because this is the first year of this space, I'm hoping that it will just continue to grow. And my ultimate goal is to run some more in-school businesses out of here. I have a teacher that would like to start a balloon business. She oversees we have a social emotional special ed program, and those students really struggle to go out to job sites. So our goal next year is to have all of her students come down here and kind of work on those job skills by maintaining and running a school business.
All right, great. So it sounds like one word of advice, just start small, but then expand from there. Kelly, anything from you in terms of building from the ground up?
I would just say, again, start small. You're going to have big goals, but everything can't be solved overnight. But be persistent. You're advocating for these students, and really continue to do that. Even if you're getting pushback, if it's something you truly believe in, find the resources, find a way, and support it with what you need to on why it needs to happen. That's a big thing. And communicate with the teachers. Listen to what they're saying. Don't just decide this is what we need because you feel like it is. Really hear what's being said as the entire, from the entire department. So that's a big thing too.
All right. Our next question, this goes out to any of you, bringing it back to the student. We know for transition planning, really, we truly want to have it be student-centered. It's always about the student, right, at the end of the day. But just hearing from all of you, there definitely are the logistical challenges and resource challenges involved. What would you say, how do you keep transition planning truly student-centered? Like, what do you recommend to those out there that want to just bring it all back to the student, given all the challenges?
I think from my perspective is it doesn't have to be something that's standalone. It should be ongoing. It doesn't have to be so formal all the time. You learn so much through just conversation. And you learn about the family, you learn about the student, and that's my thing. You have to listen. Do you know what I mean? Don't just hear, but listen to what is being said and really digest that and collaborate with all the stakeholders. I mean, things look different in different environments. yeah, it needs to be a group effort, and that can be hard. It can be challenging, but you got to find a way for that to work. So it is a true collaborative approach. I mean, that's what I think.
And I agree. And I think actually this year I just had a conversation with a student because he's a senior. He's graduated in a couple months, and what his mother wants for him is very different than what he wants for himself. And I think, as when they're younger, I kind of take a little more of the parent feedback, but I had to have this young man come out here and I had a conversation with him that, you're 18 years old now. And, like, I appreciate what your mother wants for you. And I tried to explain like why his mother wanted these things for him. But ultimately I had to remind him that, he is the one that I am providing supports for, and he is an adult now. And so, at some point he needs to kind of stand up and make decisions for himself. Because also his mother is not going to be there forever, no matter what he does, whether he goes to a job or college or whatever. So I really try to work on that self-advocacy with some of those students. But I think, again, like Kelly said, it's really just the relationship building. I attend all ninth grade IEP meetings, and I have met with the child prior to their ninth grade IEP meeting just so I can really start to develop that relationship, because they don't know me. I'm not in their classroom every day like their teachers are, and just developing kind of that relationship. So by the time it gets more serious and when we're getting ready to transition to life after high school, I've already developed that relationship with them.
Yeah, I also just want to chime in on that as well. I think involving the student at every step of the way is important. As a transition counselor in the high schools, I had attended IEP meetings where the student wasn't even in the meeting. And that is not, I learned to advocate for them so they could advocate for themselves. I think that's real important, what Jessica said too. A lot of times the counselors in our agency will say, well, that's what mom wanted. And I'm like, but mom, it's not mom's case. We could certainly look at a case for mom, but let's focus back on. So just creative ideas and being flexible. Like, mom, we're going to talk to Johnny first, and then we'll come back out and get you, and encouraging the parents. You are a support, and these are the ways you can continue to support your student, but this is their case. Because, I mean, sometimes parents have higher expectations. And as a parent myself, I understand that. So you have to be able to have those hard conversations with the parents, and this is where you want to be and this is where we're at, so where can we go in there. And I just wanted to touch base on the collaboration, Kelly, because that is so important. Working with your workforce offices, some of the programs with the RIELA boards locally, and disability services agencies, there's just so many resources. And the one thing that I try to encourage staff to do is build a team around the student. So you're not the only person. So they have other resources and other agencies working on, whether it's mental health counseling, bring that counselor to the table, or, it's the benefits counseling, talking about Social Security, or we do a work event with the workforce board. They have subsidized employment as well. They have WIOA guidelines. So it's just, collaborating all of that together, and being flexible is huge. Communication and flexibility are two key components to this.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like it really is a team effort. I love that, of forming the team around the student. Marcia, to just sort of keep going with that, is there anything the schools can do during that referral process to make it easier for students to get served more quickly or more effectively?
I think just making sure we have little brochures, and we have a transition survey. So I do best practices. So they figure it out on their own what they choose to do. But like one of the ladies mentioned, sending stuff home with them at the beginning of the year. Make sure that our stuff is in the guidance packets so that they have a little bit of information. But making sure we have Social Security card, the latest IEP or 504 plan, making sure that we have parental consent. That is one of the biggest barriers, is that you get a referral for a 17-year-old and you don't have parental consent. So you cannot move forward with anything at all. So So that's important. And maybe just understanding the difference between the pre-ETS and our regular transition services, because you don't have to do a full application for the pre-ETS services. So that's just kind of exposure to VR, exposure to work, and there's no commitment at that, right? You can just do a couple programs and you can be done, versus the whole transition services like the intake, eligibility, which would be a 504 plan or IEP, or even, medical documentation. Those are huge for us, just making sure that we have parental consent, that information is up to date.
All right, I think that is all really helpful and valuable, great information for everyone on this call to know and to keep in mind when working with their local agencies. Let's see, going back to where we started at the top of this program, we're talking about the wealth of experience here on this panel, just really impressive in terms of the number of years that you guys have been in this working in special education. What's one thing that has meaningfully changed how you approach transition services, either a lesson learned, a shift in your thinking, something that surprised you, just something during your wealth of experience that you want to share with the audience here?
I can say, initially, I was a teacher in a self-contained autism room, high school level, always was. Is finding the way in, if that makes sense. Every kid has a voice, and really figuring out what it was that they wanted to do, what was their strength. And then I could turn around and I see some of those students still in the community working part-time, and they may have a job coach still, or through the school to work program, they developed such a great relationship with that business. They wanted to hire them. I mean, some of my students were the best workers they'd ever had. So for me, it's always exciting to see them 10, 15 years later. They remember who I am. I remember who they are, and I have a terrible memory. So, I mean, just to see the success, to move away from seeing some students just sit at home and do nothing, absolutely nothing. And, for me, getting the parents to understand just because they work a certain amount of time, they still will receive benefits. That was always hard to get them to understand. One wasn't replacing the other, but seeing my students in the community now and being successful is a major thing for me.
I'll jump in too. I think the biggest thing that I've learned through my time, just in going from a teacher to, I was, a teacher and a department leader, and then moving to transition, was just the amount of resources that are really available out there for young adults with disabilities. And I think when I was just a teacher or a case manager, I didn't quite really understand that. I mean, granted, I don't know with, funding and, cutting funds if things are going to continue to exist, but there are resources out there related to employment, related to mental health. I mean, all different areas. And I think that is something that I've really seen make a difference. I think when I started teaching special ed 23 years ago, everyone kind of fit in the same box. And I think now we see such a wide range of disabilities and how it's really impacting them and their families, and just really trying to utilize those resources that are available within the school, but also outside of the school, to help support these young adults and their families. And it's always those parents that kind of down the road, 5 years after graduation, are reaching out like, Johnny has been so successful because you connected them with whatever this resource is. And, that makes me really happy that they utilize the support and that it's helping them be successful. So.
I'm going to get personal on this one. I was just talking about collaboration. I think that the biggest lesson for me was understanding that everybody had a role. And even if, let's say, for instance, one of the workforce agencies was working with a student, or I still call them my kids, by the way, working with them, that it's not mine, it's ours. And understanding that we can work together. It's just communication, the effective communication, just reaching out and saying, hello, can we meet? That's huge, because starting out, I always say an exaggerated strength is a weakness. And I remind myself of that a lot, because I want to do it all myself. And this is my time and this is what I'm doing, versus really being flexible and pulling the other people in. And I think that's my biggest lesson. So I do try to share that with our newer staff, that you certainly want everybody in your boat. You can have co-captains, it's not one captain of the boat. I think that's my biggest one.
And also, just to add on to that, because you made me think, I think in my years I've learned, you want to be a savior. I want to help every kid and every family. And, we only can do so much. We can provide them the supports. We can refer them. We can offer to attend meetings with them. But ultimately, it has to be that whole support system that is on board. And it just can't be me and the student or you and the student. It has to be everybody kind of on the same page there to support the child.
Yeah, I think all of those are great, just really valuable lessons learned throughout your wealth of experience in this field. For these webinars, we also want to make them highly practical, so that everyone walks away with some practical takeaways, something that they can implement, something that they can do right away within their roles. So with that, what's a practical piece of advice that you would give to a special education team who maybe feels like their transition services aren't where they need to be or where they would like them to be? Where should the team start? What's something practical that they can get started with?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Kelly. No, you go ahead.
I would just say, talk to each other, listen to, what knowledge this teacher might have, what this one doesn't, and ask them, what do you need? Don't assume, really sit down and do that root cause analysis, for lack of a word. Figure out what it is that you need to be successful, and make a plan. And stick to it. And like I said, be persistent. Not everybody's going to be happy with the choices you make. Not everybody's going to be on board, but look at all that stuff and come up with some options. And if it's what you need, stand behind it, but do so with grace, and some data or information to support what it is you really want to do. So,
and I was just going to say that you need to have everybody at the table. Bring everybody in. You might have new people that you've never met before, and try to develop some resources, and definitely talk about expectations. What the school's expectation is, what the parents' expectation is, what your expectation is, because everybody might be working on different agendas, still helping the student. But if you just, communication is huge. I think we all know that, but I think developing that rapport and bringing in resources and just sitting down and having that conversation.
And I was just going to say, start off by talking to the kids, and getting, feedback from the kids and seeing what interests they have or what their ultimate goals are, and kind of using that to drive your next steps. And also try to utilize resources even within the building. I mean, I've talked a lot about resources outside the building, but if I have a student that told me they were interested in working in childcare, I would connect them with our child development teacher to see if we could get them in that class, or, someone interested in culinary arts, putting them in our cooking class. Try to utilize just some of those in-school natural supports or classes that are available. So you're not even having to reinvent the wheel at first, just kind of reaching out to those things that already exist.
That brought me back to something too. A lot of times I would run into the barrier that people would assume transition, it needed to be a transition class. It needed to happen here, here, and here. Those things can be taught in core classes. They should be taught in core classes. And so that's always difficult to get, like the English teacher to understand resume writings over here. You know what I mean? And so that's the communication piece. Well, how they do here, and understanding it's not a standalone. This is, an integrated, life-changing, experience that should be happening, whatever that looks like. So that's something as well.
All right, I think we're close to wrapping up here. Kelly, since you were talking about that, and one of the topics we were covering today was just those gaps, starting to build the transition services from the ground up. Would love to hear you sort of like close this out with what you had learned when you were building from the ground up in terms of implementing these transition services from scratch, and where did you even begin, and what you've learned along the way from building these from the ground up, implementing the university startups and the other services that you were implementing at the virtual schools that you were at?
Right. Don't ever assume you know everything. There's always something new to learn, and don't be afraid to look at those things. Like I said, I did some self studies, because things change. It might just be a minute thing that changes. And reach out to people that have that information, that want to provide you with that resource or whatever that may look like, and keep that collaboration with those stakeholders together. Never do a one and done, I guess. Never get an answer and then that be it. You're going to have to come back and find this out. And there's going to be a lot of trial and error. I mean, and that's okay. You got to find out what works in a certain situation. For me, university startups, like I said, worked in this virtual environment. It was a perfect piece. It was a platform. It was easily integrated. It had what we needed. And it works. So I think it can be a benefit for a lot of places. The one thing too was the silent trainer. You go through this compliance reviewer, and you're making these changes, and you're reading what these indicator 13 things are. But the more you do it, the more you read about it, you're learning, right? So that was a bonus as well too, I'll have to say, because not everybody likes to hear constructive criticism / feedback when you're telling them that something is incorrect or that it needs to be addressed a different way. You don't always get the the response that's appropriate. We'll say it that way. So yeah.
All right, we are coming up on time. I am so glad you guys were able to join us today. I know I learned a lot. Really, this was just such a insightful and enlightening conversation. So happy that to have you guys here, just given the wealth of experience that you guys were able to share with everyone today. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our audience. When we close out, you will receive a survey, just 2 questions. Hopefully you can take the time to fill out those 2 questions really quickly. We are always looking for feedback and looking to make sure these webinars are as valuable as possible to all of you. So please take the time to share your feedback with us. All right, thank you again, everyone. Have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll see you on our next webinar.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.